Let me begin the questioning. I'm concerned about the department's request to reduce funding for the more traditional grants in the TRIO program to make room for an additional or proposed $20 million demonstration project. As I know you're aware, there's broad bipartisan bicameral support for TRIO, as these programs are effective in improving access to and the completion of higher education for students from disadvantaged backgrounds. What's the issue or the concern with TRIO programs that the department hopes to address through this proposed demonstration project?
Yeah, the hope with the demonstration project is really to build on the success of the TRIO programs. We see TRIO and Gear Up as critical to our nation's effort to try and get back to first in the world in college completion. We do think evidence is critical to that, and the demonstration project gives us the opportunity to build in an evaluation process that would generate evidence about what works most effectively in TRIO programs that would then inform the rest of the TRIO investment. But as you point out, it's a relatively small investment in the context of the overall funding level for TRIO.
Can you give me a little bit more in the way of specifics in terms of what the evidence is, what are we looking for, and how we go about doing that in the proposal?
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, this builds on the work that we've done with what's now called the Education, Innovation, and Research program within the Every Student Succeeds Act. The idea that we ought to do either randomized controlled trial or quasi-experimental design research to try to produce good evidence about best practices that then can inform work that's happening across our programs. So, for example, there have been research efforts that have shown that exposing students in particular to other first-generation college students like them who can talk about their experience from a personal perspective is more effective than receiving the same information from folks who didn't share that experience. And there's good research evidence that that difference makes a meaningful difference in students' retention, their grades, so forth. So that's the kind of information that we would like to be able to feed into the larger TRIO effort. So we think that that small investment of $20 million in the context of the overall program is worth it to try and leverage good information about what works.
As you know, TRIO has a very active support group and advocacy group of many, many years standing. Do you know, are they supportive of what you're trying to do? Have they taken a position on this one way or the other?
I'll have our team follow up. I don't know that there's been a collective response necessarily from all the folks who are interested in TRIO. I will say there's been a lot of enthusiasm for our work on the education, innovation, and research efforts.
Okay, well, good. Well, we would appreciate any information you found if you do have a chance to do that follow-up. Mr. Secretary, in the fiscal year 2016 omnibus, we provided an increase of $20 million for the Native Youth Community Projects to support culturally relevant strategies to improve college and career readiness amongst Native American children. I'm pleased to see that you've proposed an additional increase again this year. Can you please give us an update on what you think has been accomplished so far in this program and describe how you propose to build on that with your 2017 request for an additional $31 million?
Yeah, we're certainly early in the process, but what we've seen is that by bringing together tribal communities to think about what would it take to have culturally responsive instruction in the schools, leverage students' native language to try and ensure that students are on a path for college and career readiness, that we can see real educational improvement. And so we think this is an important investment. If you look at our high school graduation rates as a country, almost every group has seen improvement over the last few years, except in our most recent data, Native American students did not make improvements. And I think that's an illustration that we have more work to do to ensure that Native youth understand that college is possible for them, that jobs are possible for them. When we've met with Native youth and Native educators who are working on the Native Youth Community Projects, they talk about the hopelessness that you often see in many communities. I know you're familiar with this from your state. And that hopelessness then translates into students not being motivated in school, not sticking through to graduation, not going on to college. So we think this strategy of really focusing on bringing communities together around college and career readiness can be high leverage. That's why we propose a significant increase.
Well, I just want to commend you for doing so and appreciate your focus, the department's focus, certainly the administration's focus on this population in this area. You're to be commended for it. Mr. Secretary, several education advocacy organizations are concerned about the department's funding request for Title I grants to local education agencies because they believe it would result in a reduction in Title I allocation in many schools. In a sense, it's sort of building on the point that my good friend from California made. Are these groups correct in that? And if so, why does the request shortchange districts and instead invest in some unauthorized competitive grant programs as opposed to something sort of tried and true like Title I?
Yeah, so let me give some context to how we approach the Title I allocation. So our Title I proposal is actually $350 million above the authorized level because we do think Title I is very important in getting resources to our highest need districts. What we propose is that $350 million be divided between formula dollars and school improvement dollars that would focus on the schools that are struggling. So for districts that have significant numbers of struggling schools, they will likely see level funding or an increase because of that school improvement focus. But because states will determine which schools are the schools most in need of improvement, and states are the ones who develop those lists, it's not possible for us to project exactly what the implications will be for any given district. It will depend on how many schools they have that are deeply struggling.
Well, not to push this point too hard, but as I'm sure you're aware, there's a great deal of unease and uncertainty because of that, there isn't a predictability there. And there's concern that some of these schools will literally just fall through the cracks, or we'll have something done at a state level that really doesn't direct the money to where it's needed. So I think that's something that a lot of folks have considerable concern about. In terms of the Every Child Succeeds Act represented a significant shift of control over K-12 education policies and programs from federal to the state level. How does your budget request address this shift and assist in building capacity in states to take over these new responsibilities? And wouldn't a larger investment in block and formula grants as opposed to the new competitive grant programs included in your budget be a better way to help states to succeed under the new law?
We certainly think that the increases that we saw in Title I last year, the significant increase we propose in the Title IV programs, will be important to Every Student Succeeds Act implementation. We also are in the process now. We've gathered, we've held public hearings. We've gathered significant public comment on implementation. We've begun negotiated rulemaking in 2 areas based on input from states and districts, as well as civil rights organizations and community organizations. And we intend to implement the law in a very collaborative way, gathering feedback throughout as we develop guidance and regulations. Driving our work on guidance and technical assistance will be what we hear from districts and states about what they need. We do think some of the specific competitive grant requests here advance key priorities within the Every Student Succeeds Act. But it's worth saying that 94% of what we propose is directed to formula dollars. The vast majority of what's funded in the President's budget is through formula. But we do think there are places where competitive grants can highlight or incentivize particular practices that will help drive educational improvement.
Well, and this is hardly your fault, but there is some concern, certainly I have concerns that because Congress was late in getting this legislation to you, frankly, the President, and with all due respect, you will only be there for a certain period of time, a few months, really. And I'm very skeptical about new initiatives when the people that are implementing them aren't going to have the time frame to actually be there. So, you have any concern of that yourself?
Well, we think that the proposals that we've made really build on the last 7 years of work, build on the bipartisan agreement in the Every Student Succeeds Act, and point towards important priorities that are shared bipartisan priorities. So we propose, for example, an increase in the preschool development grant program because I think there's strong bipartisan consensus not only in Washington but in state capitals around the importance of investing in early learning. We propose a program around computer science because I think everyone understands, again, in a bipartisan way, that computer science is a part of our future competitiveness and that we ought to be helping districts and states think about how to support their students in achieving around computer science so that they're ready to compete for the 21st century jobs that will rely on computer science.
Mr. Secretary, I was surprised, and this touches on a point that Ms. Roybal Allard made earlier, but I was surprised that your budget request included only $500 million for the newly authorized Student Support and Academic Enrichment State Grant. That's less than a third of the authorized level. The program's intended to be a flexible funding stream that allows states and school districts to invest in those areas that are most needed to improve the quality of education. So I was disappointed that the request seeks, I was also disappointed the request seeks to change the local allocations from a formula basis to a competitive basis, which would further shortchange many school districts and frankly, in my view, circumvents congressional intent. So again, I understand the resources are limited here, and it would be a challenge under any circumstances to fully meet the authorized level. But the funding it at the requested level seems to me to significantly curtail its potential usefulness to support school districts. Why does is it simply a math problem, a cap problem that we're this low on this? And again, it seems to me there are other areas where you've requested funding that frankly, I would rather see the money here in these kind of things than perhaps in some of the other areas. But I want to give you an opportunity to elaborate on that.
Sure. Again, we see this as a significant increase over the pre-existing programs. So the 4 programs that were funded previously were only at 278. So taking it up to 500 is a significant increase. We do think there's an opportunity for more discussion in a bipartisan way about how to move forward with the Title IV program. The competitive grant component would be an option for states, so we're not proposing requiring states to make it competitive. But the concern, as I mentioned earlier, was if the formula delivers a grant that is just too small to do anything meaningful, then that's a missed opportunity. So we see this as an opportunity for states to identify priorities within the many available uses of Title IV dollars, and then to have a competitive process. States could weigh in that process, attention to rural issues. They could weigh in that process attention to perhaps pooling of resources across smaller districts. But we want to make sure that folks have an opportunity to advance the purposes of Title IV around a well-rounded education, school counseling, advanced placement courses, so forth.
Okay, well, thank you for the explanation.